The sky over Harlan County had been the same shade of bleached bone for 11 weeks straight. Dale Merritt stood at the edge of his front porch, one boot propped on the lowest rail, a mug of black coffee cooling in his left hand. He wasn't looking at his own land. He was looking across the dry creek bed that divided Merritt property from Ashby property. At the brown fields where Conrad Ashby's winter wheat should have been standing chest high by now. Instead, there was nothing. Cracked earth. Dead stalks bent sideways by a wind that carried no moisture, only heat and the fine red dust that coated everything in Harlan County from June through September. It was the worst drought in 34 years. The county agricultural report had made that official 2 weeks ago, though every farmer in a 50-mile radius had already known it in their bones since April. Dale was 61 years old. He had a face like topography, lined and carved by decades of outdoor work, sun damage running deep into the creases around his eyes and mouth. His hair had gone silver in his early 50s, and he kept it cut short out of practicality rather than vanity. He was not a tall man, but he was built solidly, with the kind of physical presence that came from a lifetime of actual labor rather than a gym. His hands were the most telling thing about him, thick-fingered, scarred across the knuckles with permanent dirt worked into the creases of his palms that no amount of scrubbing had ever fully removed. Merritt Ranch covered 2,400 acres of northwest Texas. It had been in the family for 4 generations, passed from his great-grandfather Elias Merritt, who had originally broken the ground in 1901. Down through the line to Dale's father, Roy Merritt, who had handed Dale the deed on the morning of Dale's 32nd birthday with nothing more ceremonial than a handshake and the words, "Don't let it go." Dale had not let it go. Through 2 economic crashes, a divorce, a flood in 2009 that had taken out 2 barns and a quarter-mile of fence line, and now this drought, he had not let it go. Behind him, the screen door pushed open, and his ranch manager, Bobby Stills, stepped out carrying his own mug. Bobby was 53, lean and dark-skinned, with a gray-flecked beard he kept neatly trimmed. He had worked for Dale for 19 years and was, in every practical sense, the second in command of Merritt Ranch. "Heard from Calhoun at the co-op this morning," Bobby said, settling into the wooden chair beside the rail. Dale didn't turn around. "What did he say?" "Bank posted the notice. Ashby land goes to auction September 14th if the balance isn't settled." Dale lifted his coffee mug, took a slow sip, and said nothing. Bobby watched him for a moment. "That's 11 days from now." "I know when September 14th is, Bobby. Just making sure." Bobby leaned back in the chair. "Half the county's already talking about going to that auction. Morrison's operation out of Lubbock sent a representative down last week. They want the western 40 acres something fierce. Backs right up to the reservoir easement. I know what the western 40 backs up to." Bobby was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the dry grass below the porch, making a sound like something being slowly torn. In the distance, one of Dale's cattle lowed once and went silent. "You gonna go to that auction?" Bobby asked. Dale set his mug down on the rail. He looked out across the dead creek bed, across the cracked expanse of what had once been the most productive wheatland in Harlan County. Conrad Ashby had been his neighbor for 31 years, his rival for nearly as long. The man had filed 3 separate boundary disputes against Dale in county court, had blocked a water-sharing agreement in 2017 that would have benefited both operations, and had stood at the fence line between their properties on more than one occasion and said things to Dale Merritt that a man didn't forget. There was history between them. Deep, complicated, heavy history that had nothing to do with boundary disputes or water rights, though those had served as convenient proxies for years. "No," Dale said finally, "I'm not going to that auction." Bobby nodded slowly, as though that answer confirmed something he'd been thinking. "People are going to say you're letting him drown on purpose, that you're satisfied. Let them say it. Are you satisfied?" Dale picked up his mug again, turned, and went back inside without answering. The town of Calvary, Texas had a population of 4,200 people, a single traffic light, a feed store that had been in operation since 1952, and a community relationship with gossip that functioned as efficiently as any social media platform. News traveled through Calvary the way water traveled through limestone, finding every crack, filling every space, emerging in unexpected places. The news about Conrad Ashby's debt had been traveling for 3 months. Conrad Ashby was 64 years old, a big man who had been even bigger in his youth, broad-shouldered, physically dominant in the way that some men from farming families are, as though the land itself had shaped them to match its requirements. He had played football at Harlan County High School in 1979 and 1980, had been recruited by 2 universities, and had instead come home to run Ashby Farm because his father, Gerald Ashby, had suffered a stroke in the spring of Conrad's senior year. That decision, coming home instead of leaving, had defined everything that followed. Conrad had never spoken of it as a sacrifice. He had, in fact, spoken of it very little at all, because Conrad Ashby was not a man who spoke openly about the internal mechanics of his life. He was formal, private, proud to a degree that most people in Calvary recognized as both his greatest strength and his most significant flaw. Ashby Farm covered 1,800 acres, less than Merritt Ranch, and positioned on slightly less favorable ground. The soil on the Ashby side of the creek line ran shallower, with a caliche layer that complicated irrigation. Conrad had managed it well for decades through a combination of skill, stubbornness, and the willingness to take on debt strategically. He had modernized his equipment in 2015 with a significant bank loan, had restructured that loan in 2019, and had then been hit in succession by a failed harvest in 2022, rising fuel costs through 2023 and 2024, and now this drought. The balance on his operating loan at First Harlan County Bank was $247,000. He had $31,000 in liquid assets. He had 11 days. Conrad knew these numbers the way a man knows the dimensions of a room he has been locked in intimately, involuntarily, with a kind of nauseating precision that woke him at 2 in the morning and sat with him unto dawn. He was sitting at his kitchen table on the morning of September 4th when his daughter came downstairs. Sienna Ashby was 32 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, dark green, sharp, with the quality of seeing through things rather than simply at them. She had grown up on this land, left it to study agricultural business management at Texas Tech, worked for 4 years at a consulting firm in Dallas, and then come home 18 months ago when it became clear that her father's financial situation required more than remote advice. She poured herself coffee, looked at the papers spread across the table, the bank statements, the loan documents, the figures Conrad had been rearranging on a yellow legal pad, as though a different arrangement might produce a different answer, and sat down across from him. "Dad," she said. "Morning. Did you sleep?" "Some." He hadn't. She could see it in the color beneath his eyes, in the particular stillness of him that was different from his normal stillness. "I made some calls yesterday," Sienna said. "There's an agricultural relief fund through the state that we haven't fully explored." "We've explored it," Conrad said. "Maximum disbursement is $40,000. That's not the gap. It's part of the gap. It's not enough of the gap." Sienna wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, through the kitchen window, the same dead landscape that Dale Merritt was looking at from his porch stretched to the horizon. The same cracked earth, the same defeated grass, the same sky that offered nothing. "Then we need to talk about the auction," she said. Conrad's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, barely visible, but Sienna had been reading her father's face for 32 years. "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "Dad," I said, "there's nothing to talk about." He stood up from the table, picked up his coffee, and moved to the window. "That land is not going to auction. I'll find another way." "What other way?" "We've been through every option. Then we go through them again." Sienna looked at her father's back, the set of his shoulders. The way he held himself against the window frame, as though the glass were the only thing between him and something worse. She wanted to push harder. She had numbers on her side, logic, the clear-eyed analysis she had been trained to perform. But she also understood something about Conrad Ashby that no business school had taught her, that for this man, this land was not an asset on a balance sheet. It was his identity, his inheritance. The physical proof that his decision to come home in 1980 instead of leaving had been worth something. Losing it would not simply be a financial setback. It would be the end of something he could not name but had organized his entire life around protecting. She said nothing more. She picked up the bank statement and studied the numbers again, looking for anything she might have missed. She found nothing. 7 days before the auction, Dale Merritt drove into Calvary. He parked his truck in front of First Harlan County Bank, a squat brick building on Main Street with a flagpole out front and a hand-lettered sign in the window advertising current CD rates. He sat in the truck for a few minutes with the engine off, looking at the building. Then he got out, pushed through the glass door, and asked to speak with Gerald Pomeroy, the bank manager. Gerald Pomeroy was 58, soft-spoken, and had worked at First Harlan County Bank for 26 years. He knew every significant financial situation in the county the way a doctor knows a patient's chart, with professional detachment that occasionally failed under the weight of genuine human concern. He had watched Conrad Ashby's situation develop over the past 2 years, with the particular helplessness of a man who understands a system's rules too well to pretend they can be bent. He shook Dale's hand and led him back to his office. "What can I do for you, Dale?" Dale sat down across from Gerald's desk. He put his hat on his knee. He looked at Gerald Pomeroy with the direct, undecorated expression of a man who has thought carefully about what he is about to say and has decided to say it plainly. "I want to pay Conrad Ashby's operating loan," Dale said. "The full balance, whatever it takes to keep his land out of that auction." Gerald Pomeroy was quiet for what felt like a long time. "Dale," he said finally, "I know what I'm saying. That's $247,000. I know what the number is." Gerald leaned back in his chair. He looked at Dale carefully, the way he might look at a loan application that didn't quite add up, searching for the variable he was missing. "Can I ask why?" "No," Dale said. Another silence. "This is an unusual request," Gerald said. "I expect it is. Conrad doesn't know you're here." "No, he's not going to." Gerald paused, choosing his words. "He's a proud man, Dale. This could go badly. That's my problem to deal with, not yours. You just need to tell me if it's legally possible to do what I'm describing." Gerald folded his hands on his desk. From a purely procedural standpoint, it was straightforward enough. A third party satisfying a debt on behalf of a borrower was not unprecedented. It was unusual, but not impossible. "It's possible," Gerald said. "The bank would accept payment of the full balance from a third party. The lien would be satisfied, the foreclosure proceedings would be halted, and the property would remain in Conrad's name, free and clear of this particular obligation." "Then let's do it," Dale said. "I need you to understand that once this transaction is complete, I cannot keep it confidential indefinitely. Financial transactions of this size, I'm not asking for confidentiality," Dale said. "I'm asking you to process the payment. What people know or don't know after that is out of both our hands." Gerald looked at him for another long moment. Then he reached for his desk drawer and pulled out the appropriate paperwork. Dale Merritt drove home in the late afternoon with the transaction receipt in his glove compartment and the specific, hollow exhaustion of a man who has done something irreversible. He stopped at the end of his driveway and looked across the dry creek bed one more time. The Ashby land looked the same as it had this morning, cracked and defeated and dry. Nothing had visibly changed. But something had shifted in the architecture of the situation. in the invisible structure of obligation and history that stretched between those two pieces of land and the two men who worked them. Dale pulled up the driveway, parked, and went inside. He did not tell Bobby. He did not tell anyone. He went to bed at 9 o'clock and for the first time in weeks slept straight through until morning. The news reached Conrad Ashby on a Tuesday morning, and it arrived the way bad news, or news that defies easy categorization, so often does in small towns, sideways. From an unexpected direction, carrying the specific momentum of something that has already traveled far before finding you. He was at the co-op, loading 2 50-pound bags of mineral supplement into the bed of his truck, when Ray Calhoun, who ran the co-op and had been processing Ashby farm orders for 20 years, came out of the side door with an expression Conrad didn't immediately know how to read. "Conrad," Ray said. Something in the way he said the single word made Conrad set down the bag he was holding. "Gerald Pomeroy called me this morning," Ray said. He stopped a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his work vest, looking slightly to the left of Conrad's face, in the manner of a man delivering news he is not sure he should be delivering. He said, "And I want you to know I'm just passing this on because I'd want to know, if it were me." He said, "The auction's been called off. The bank loan's been satisfied." Conrad looked at him. "Full balance," Ray continued. "Paid out yesterday afternoon." "That's not possible," Conrad said. Gerald seemed pretty certain. "I didn't pay it. Sienna didn't pay it. That's not—" He stopped. The logical mechanics of what Ray was telling him began assembling themselves into an unavoidable shape. Who paid it? Ray looked at the ground briefly, then back up. Dale Merritt. The silence that followed had a physical quality to it. The sounds of the co-op, a forklift running somewhere inside, country radio drifting from an open window, the distant complaint of cattle from the pens across the road, continued around them as though the world had not just shifted on its axis. Conrad's face did not change expression. This was not because he felt nothing. It was because what he felt was so large and so complex that it had temporarily outpaced any ability to represent itself on his face. "Thank you, Ray," he said. He loaded the second bag into the truck bed, got in the cab, and drove out of the co-op parking lot at exactly the speed he always drove. Sienna found out 40 minutes later. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop, working through a revised cash flow projection she had built on the optimistic assumption that they might secure a partial deferment from the bank, when her phone rang. It was Donna Phelps, who worked at the county clerk's office and had been her mother's closest friend. "Honey," Donna said, "I don't know if you've heard, but I thought you should know before it gets around any further." Sienna listened. When she hung up the phone, she sat very still for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up the Harlan County Public Records portal. It took her 11 minutes to locate the lien satisfaction filing, clean, official, time-stamped at 4:47 p.m. the previous afternoon. Creditor, First Harlan County Bank. Debtor, Ashby Farm LLC. Payment received in full from Dale R. Merritt. She read it 3 times. Then she heard her father's truck on the gravel outside. Conrad came in through the back door, set his keys on the hook by the doorframe with his customary precision, and walked to the kitchen sink. He turned on the water and washed his hands, methodically, thoroughly, in the way he did after any physical work, though he had only been loading supplement bags. Sienna watched him. "You heard," she said. He turned off the water, dried his hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, turned around. "Yes," he said. "Dad, I need to think." "Okay, but, Sienna." His voice was not loud, but it had a quality that had always worked as effectively as volume. "I need to think." She let him go. She heard his boots on the stairs, heard the door to his study close. She sat back down at the kitchen table and looked at the lien satisfaction document on her screen. Dale R. Merritt. She had grown up understanding that the Merritt and Ashby families did not get along. It was the kind of thing that was presented as fact in her childhood. As simply as geography or weather, the Merritts were to the east, past the dry creek, and they were not friends. She had absorbed this without questioning it, the way children absorb the foundational assumptions of their households. As an adult, she had observed the specific forms the antagonism took, the boundary dispute filings, the 2017 water-sharing meeting that her father had effectively killed with a single statement to the county commissioners, the rare occasions when the two men occupied the same public space in Calvary, and the air around them changed in a way everyone present could feel. She had never thought to ask why. She had accepted the feud the way she accepted the caliche layer under the shallow soil on the west side of their property as a pre-existing condition, something that predated her understanding and could not be usefully interrogated. Now, looking at Dale Merritt's name on a legal document representing $247,000 of his own money, she found herself interrogating it for the first time. Why would a man who hates you pay your debts? Bobby Stills found out at noon when he drove into Calvary to pick up a parts order at the farm supply and ran into 3 separate people who wanted to talk about it before he reached the door. He drove back to Merritt Ranch and found Dale in the equipment shed, doing maintenance work on the smaller of the 2 tractors. "You want to tell me what happened yesterday afternoon?" Bobby said. Dale didn't look up from the engine. "Not especially." "Dale, hand me that half-inch socket." Bobby picked up the socket from the workbench and held it without passing it over. "The whole county is talking. You paid Conrad Ashby's banknote." Dale looked up then. He took the socket from Bobby's hand, turned back to the engine. "That's right, $247,000. I know how much it was. I wrote the check." Bobby was quiet for a moment. He leaned against the workbench and crossed his arms, watching Dale work. The shed smelled of diesel and metal and the particular dry heat of Texas September, and somewhere outside a hawk was making its repetitive, piercing call over the empty fields. "You going to tell me why?" Bobby said. "No. Is it something I need to know for practical purposes? Something that affects how we run this place?" "No." Bobby studied the side of Dale's face, the concentration there that was. He had learned over 19 years, not always about what was immediately in front of him. "People are going to read this a lot of different ways," Bobby said. "Some of them are going to be wrong, and some of those wrong readings are going to make your life complicated. I know that. And you did it anyway." "Yes." Bobby unfolded his arms and pushed off the workbench. He stood there in another moment, and then something shifted in his expression. The professional assessment gave way to something more direct. "Is this about Margaret?" he said. Dale's hand stopped moving on the engine. The silence in the shed was absolute, except for the hawk outside, still calling. "Hand me the torque wrench," Dale said. Bobby picked it up, held it out. Their eyes met briefly as Dale took it. Bobby walked out of the shed and let him work in peace. Margaret. Her name was Margaret Ann Ashby, and she had been, before she became Margaret Ann Ashby, Margaret Ann Holloway, which was the name she had when Dale Merritt first met her in the autumn of 1989. He had been 24 years old. She had been 22. He had been back on the ranch for 2 years at that point, working under his father, learning the operation from the ground up with the focused determination of someone who understood that this was the life he had chosen and intended to earn properly. She was from Odessa originally, had come to Calvary to work as a bookkeeper for the Farmco, which her uncle managed at the time. She rented a small house on Clement Street, drove a white pickup truck that was already showing age, and had a quality about her, a composed, clear-eyed directness that Dale had noticed before he ever spoke to her. He had spoken to her in October 1989 at a fall harvest gathering at the Calvary Community Center. They had talked for 2 hours. He had asked if he could see her again. She had said yes. They had dated for 7 months. It had been, for Dale, the most significant 7 months of his life to that point, a period that had clarified something in him about what he wanted and what he was capable of feeling. Margaret was intelligent and practical and quietly funny, and she understood agricultural life from the inside rather than from a distance. which mattered to him in ways he hadn't known to articulate until he encountered it. In May of 1990, three things happened in close succession. Conrad Ashby came back to a Calvary. Conrad had been away, working a management position at a large agricultural operation in the Panhandle, which is what he had done after returning from a single semester at Texas A&M, which is what he had done after deciding not to take the football scholarship in 1980. He and Dale had known each other in the peripheral way of young men who grow up in the same county without being close, aware of each other, occasionally in the same spaces, but not friends. Not enemies yet. Conrad met Margaret at a church social in the second week of May, 3 weeks later. Margaret came to Dale and told him that she had feelings for Conrad Ashby, that she was sorry, that she didn't know how to explain it, except that something had happened that she hadn't anticipated, and she needed to be honest with him. Dale had said very little. He was not a man who expressed pain outwardly. It was not in his construction, but the pain had been real and specific, and had lodged in him in a place that did not fully heal. Conrad and Margaret married in September of 1991. The first boundary dispute was filed by Conrad Ashby in 1993. Margaret Ashby had died in 2018. Breast cancer, diagnosed late, progressed quickly. She had been 50 years old. Conrad had nursed her through it with a ferocious, private dedication that even people who disliked Conrad Ashby had acknowledged as real. Dale had not attended the funeral. He had sent flowers, anonymously, through a florist in Lubbock rather than the local shop, so that the origin would not be immediately traceable. He was not certain, even now, why he had done that. Some combination of respect and grief and the complicated obligation of a man who had loved someone decades ago and never fully stopped. He had driven past the Ashby property on the day of the funeral on his way back from a supply run he had deliberately scheduled for that day to give himself somewhere to be. He had slowed at the creek crossing and looked at the cars lined along the Ashby Drive, the people moving in and out of the house. He had driven on. That night he had sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey and the stars over West Texas and thought about what he owed. Not to Conrad, not exactly to Margaret, to something more abstract and harder to name, to the truth of what had actually happened in 1990. The full truth, which the years had simplified into a narrative of romantic rivalry, but which was more complicated than that. He had been thinking about it, off and on, for 8 years since her death. And then the drought had come, and the bank notice had gone up. And September 14th had appeared on the calendar like a fixed point around which a decision had been long accumulating. On the evening of the day he paid Conrad's debt, Dale sat on his porch, as he often did, and looked at the same sky he had looked at the night of Margaret's funeral. The whiskey glass was on the rail beside his coffee mug. He had not resolved anything. That was the thing people misunderstood about the gestures that accumulate under the heading of making things right. They did not resolve the underlying architecture. They addressed a specific, practical consequence. The debt between Dale Merritt and Conrad Ashby was not $247,000. That was just the number that had appeared at the intersection of their histories in September of a drought year. The real debt was older and heavier and had no clean number attached to it. But you started somewhere. You did the thing in front of you. That was all Dale knew how to do. Conrad Ashby came to Merritt Ranch on a Thursday morning, 9 days after the payment had been made. He drove his truck down the main road rather than cutting across through the Old Creek access, which would have been faster. A deliberate choice, Sienna understood when she heard about it later, to arrive formally rather than by the back way. He parked in the gravel outside the main house and sat in the truck for a moment, then got out and knocked on the front door. Bobby Stills answered. Bobby had been expecting this or something like it, and had mentioned to Dale the previous evening that it was probably coming. Dale had said, "Show him in if he comes." Bobby led Conrad through the house and out to the back porch. where Dale was working through a stack of invoices at the outdoor table. Dale looked up. The two men looked at each other. Bobby went back inside and pulled the screen door closed behind him. The back porch of Merritt Ranch looked west toward the horizon, a long, flat view across Dale's fields to the distant line of scrub cedar that marked the property boundary. The morning light was coming from behind them, throwing long shadows across the boards of the porch floor. It was still early enough to be almost cool. Conrad sat down in the chair across from Dale without being invited, which was itself a statement of something he was not going to perform the social choreography of guest and host. They were two 60-something farmers from neighboring properties who had been conducting a 30-year Cold War, and they were past that particular theater. "I came to ask you a question," Conrad said. "All right, why did you do it?" Dale set down the invoice he had been holding. He looked at Conrad directly, at the face that had aged as his own had aged into something weathered and permanent, at the eyes that were gray and currently carrying the particular flatness of a man who has been processing something alone for 9 days and has not reached a conclusion. "I owed you," Dale said. Conrad was quiet for a moment. "You don't owe me anything. We've been fighting over that creek boundary for 20 years. The creek boundary has nothing to do with it." "Then what does?" Dale picked up his coffee mug, put it down again without drinking. He looked out at his fields, at the cracked ground that would eventually receive rain, that would eventually recover, as it had recovered from every hard season before this one. "You know I was with Margaret before you were," Dale said. Conrad's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I know that. Do you know why it ended?" A pause. "She told me it ended because she had feelings for me." "That's true," Dale said, "but it's not the whole truth." Conrad looked at him steadily. The hawk, or perhaps a different hawk, was calling again somewhere over the dry fields. The sound was very clear in the morning quiet. "Then tell me the whole truth," Conrad said. The whole truth, as Dale Merritt had lived it for 36 years, was this. In the spring of 1990, before Conrad came back to Calvary, and before Margaret told Dale that she had feelings for someone else, Dale had done something. He had been offered a partnership opportunity, a chance to buy into an equipment dealership in Abilene with 2 other men from the county. It would have required significant capital. More capital than Dale had, but potentially accessible if he leveraged the ranch. The opportunity was real, and his father was aging, and something in Dale, something young and restless and not yet fully reconciled to the life that had been laid out for him, had been drawn to it. He had discussed it with Margaret. She was his bookkeeper, not professionally, but as the person who understood numbers best in his immediate world. She had laid it out for him, run the projections, and told him clearly, "You could do this, but you'd be betting everything your family built on a partnership with 2 men you've known for less than 2 years. Is that who you are?" And he had said, "I don't know who I am yet." And she had looked at him with those direct green eyes and said something that had lodged in him permanently. "I think you do know. I think you know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to do. I think you're just scared of accepting it." He had not gone into the partnership. He had stayed on the ranch. He had, over the following months, begun to understand that she was right, that this was who he was, that the land was not a limitation but a definition, and that accepting it was not defeat but clarity. He had also, in that same period, begun to feel something else, a kind of resentment, not of Margaret exactly, of the clarity of having been seen so precisely by another person and having had no equivalent insight to offer in return. It was an irrational feeling. He had known it was irrational even then, but it had made him, in the weeks before Conrad Ashby returned to Calvary, slightly less present, slightly withdrawn, slightly unreachable in a way that Margaret had noticed and commented on. When Conrad came back and Margaret met him, she had not been looking for anything. Dale believed that absolutely. He had believed it for 36 years. She had not been looking, and Conrad had not been a plan. But the ground had been prepared, in some small way, by Dale's own withdrawal. That was the part he had never told anyone. It was not a dramatic betrayal. It was not an action that would stand up to external judgment as particularly blameworthy. No one would look at the facts and say, Dale Merritt wronged Conrad Ashby. But Dale had turned it over for decades in the private court of his own conscience, and the verdict he kept reaching was simpler and more uncomfortable than external innocence. You gave her a reason to look elsewhere. Not intentionally, but really. And then Conrad had been the one to give her a life. Conrad had been the one to marry her, to build something with her, to sit beside her through 30 years and through the worst thing a person can go through. Conrad had earned her day after day in ways that Dale had never had the chance to. The boundary disputes Dale had come to understand were Conrad's own version of processing something he would never say aloud. The water-sharing block in 2017, the fence line confrontations. All of it was the externalization of something internal, the compressed anger of a man who suspected, without evidence, without anything he could hold, that his neighbor and his late wife had a history that mattered. Conrad had been right to suspect it, not in any way he could have named, not in any way that would have required a different decision, but right that something had existed. And Dale, who had never wronged Conrad in any legal or even strictly moral sense, had spent 30 years feeling the specific, grinding weight of the person who benefited from a situation without having earned the benefit. He told Conrad all of this on the back porch of Merritt Ranch on a Thursday morning. He told it plainly, without flourish, the way he did everything, looking at the horizon, speaking in his regular voice, not performing remorse but presenting fact. When he finished, the silence lasted long enough that a cloud shadow moved across the porch and passed. Conrad said, "That's what you think you owed me. That's what I know I owed you," Dale said. Conrad looked out at the fields. His hands were on his knees, both of them. His profile was set and still. "You're telling me," Conrad said slowly, "that you paid $247,000 because you withdrew emotionally from a woman in 1990. I'm telling you why I paid it. You can evaluate the proportionality yourself." Conrad made a sound that was not quite a laugh, something shorter and more involuntary. He looked at Dale, and for the first time in any encounter Dale could remember, the flatness was gone from Conrad's eyes. Something else was there, something complicated and not yet fully readable. "Margaret never said anything about you to me," Conrad said. "Not once in 30 years. I know. I always wondered. I never asked. I know that too." Another silence. Conrad looked back at the fields. "Did you love her?" he said. The question was direct, almost clinical in its delivery, but Dale heard the weight under it. "Yes," Dale said. Conrad nodded slowly, once, as though that answered something beyond the literal question. "I'm going to need some time with this," Conrad said. "Take whatever you need," Dale said. "The debt is satisfied regardless. I'm not asking for anything from you." Conrad stood up. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the table. He stood for a moment looking out at the west horizon, and Dale could see him working through something, the visible mechanics of a man reassembling his understanding of 30 years. Then Conrad walked through the back porch door and through the house and got in his truck. Dale watched the dust trail his tires raised on the main road until it disappeared at the county line. Sienna Ashby had been watching for her father's truck. She was in the barn when he pulled up, and she came out before he reached the house, reading his face with the precision she had developed over a lifetime. She had never seen her father look like that, not undone, not defeated, but altered in some way she couldn't immediately name, as though he had gone somewhere he had not expected to go, and come back changed by the geography. "What happened?" she said. He walked past her toward the house. "I'll tell you later." "Dad, Sienna." He stopped at the door, turned, and the look on his face in that moment, she would think about it for years afterward, was the face of a man who has just been relieved of a weight he had been carrying for so long that he had forgotten he was carrying it. "I'll tell you at dinner," he said. "Set an extra plate." She frowned. "For who?" but he had already gone inside. Bobby Stills was the one who called Sienna. Dale had asked him to, which itself was something. Dale asking someone else to make a social call on his behalf was unusual. Enough that Bobby had simply said all right and done it without asking for an explanation. Bobby called Sienna's cell at 4 in the afternoon, introduced himself as Dale Merritt's ranch manager, and said, "Your father accepted an invitation to dinner at Merritt Ranch this evening. Dale asked me to call and let you know so you wouldn't worry when he wasn't home." Sienna had stood in the kitchen holding her phone, very still, processing this piece of information. "Thank you," she said. She cooked her own dinner alone that evening, eating at the kitchen table with the farm accounts open on her laptop, but not really reading them. She was thinking about everything she knew, which, she was increasingly understanding, was considerably less than she had assumed. Dale had cooked the dinner himself. He was not a sophisticated cook, but he was a competent one in the specific way of people who have lived alone for extended periods and have made their peace with feeding themselves properly. He made brisket. He had put it in the smoker at 6 that morning, before he knew Conrad was coming, and roasted corn from the last of the summer harvest he'd bought at the Cope, and skillet cornbread, and a pot of pinto beans that had been on the stove since midday. Conrad arrived at 6:30. He knocked at the front door, which meant he had driven around again rather than cutting through the creek access. Dale opened the door. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Dale stepped back from the door, and Conrad stepped inside. Bobby had set the table before making himself scarce. He had a particular skill for tactical absence that Dale had always appreciated. The house smelled of brisket smoke and the particular warm interior smell of a well-worked kitchen, and the evening light was coming through the west windows in long amber shafts. They sat down. Dale served. Conrad said nothing about the food's quality, which was the highest compliment available within their shared communication style. They ate in silence for the first several minutes. Then Conrad said, "I want to tell you something." Dale looked up. "I knew," Conrad said, "that Margaret had been serious about someone before me. I didn't know it was you specifically until I suspected it for years. I found a letter once, not addressed to anyone, not finished. She had been writing something and stopped, and the draft was in an old book she kept. I read the first few lines before I understood what I was reading, and I put it back." Dale waited. "I never brought it up to her," Conrad said. "I never asked her about it. I told myself it was before my time and it wasn't my business." He turned his fork over in his hand, looking at it. "But I spent 20 years taking it out on you without having the honesty to admit that's what I was doing. The boundary disputes, the water meeting, all of it." He set the fork down. "That was wrong, and I knew it was wrong at the time. He stopped. "You didn't have anywhere else to put it," Dale said. Conrad looked at him across the table. Something in the directness of that statement, the lack of judgment in it, seemed to land differently than Conrad had expected. "No," Conrad said. "I didn't." Dale cut a piece of brisket, ate it. The evening outside the window had deepened to gold. "We've wasted a lot of years," Dale said. "Yes, that creek boundary was always legal. You knew that. Yes, the water sharing agreement would have benefited your operation more than mine. I know that too." Dale leaned back in his chair. He looked at Conrad, at the man who had married the woman he had loved, who had given her a life and sat beside her through its ending, who had filed petty legal complaints against him for 20 years as a way of externalizing grief he had no language for. "She was lucky to have you," Dale said. "Whatever you think about the beginning of it, she was lucky to have you for 30 years. Conrad was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork again. "The brisket is good," he said. And that somehow was both a deflection and an acceptance, the particular language of two men from a place where direct emotional acknowledgement was available in limited denominations, and who had just spent the maximum available. They finished dinner. Bobby came back in for coffee, and the three of them sat at the table while the Texas night settled outside and the coyotes started their distant calling somewhere in the dark scrubland. Bobby talked about the weather forecast, The first meaningful chance of rain in 12 weeks was showing on the models for the following week. Conrad said his soil needed 3 inches minimum to break the surface crust. Dale said his water table was 2 feet lower than his grandfather had ever recorded. They talked about the land, about what it needed and what it gave and what it cost. About the specific arithmetic of farming in a place that tested you every season and gave no credit for previous seasons past. Around 9 o'clock, Conrad stood up. "I'll pay you back," he said to Dale. Dale shook his head. "No, I'm not taking charity from, it's not charity." Dale's voice was level and certain. "I told you this morning what it was. It was a debt of a different kind. Debts don't have to be repaid in the same currency they were owed." Conrad looked at him for a long time. Then he put on his hat. "The creek access," he said. "The boundary. I'll drop the current filing. That would be appreciated. And the water sharing proposal, if it's still viable, I'd be willing to look at it again." Dale nodded. "I'll have Bobby pull the old documents." Conrad shook Bobby's hand. He shook Dale's hand, and for the first time in 30 years, Dale felt in that handshake the specific quality of contact between two people who are meeting each other in some important sense for the first time. Conrad left through the front door. Dale and Bobby stood on the porch and watched his taillights disappear down the road. "You want to tell me what happened in there?" Bobby said. "Not tonight," Dale said. "Tomorrow, maybe never." Bobby put his hands in his pockets. The sky of Harlan County was enormous and clear and full of stars. And somewhere not far away, the coyotes had started up again, and the night smelled of dust and cedar and the faint mineral promise of distant rain. "Good brisket, though," Bobby said. "Thank you," said Dale. Sienna Ashby called her father at 9:40 that night. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already home and sitting somewhere quietly, which she knew was a sign that he was in a particular internal state. "How was dinner?" she said. A pause. "Fine. Dad, it was fine, Sienna. We ate and talked. You and Dale Merritt talked." "Yes. About what?" Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear him breathing, could hear what sounded like the creak of the porch rocker. "Old things," he said finally. Sienna sat with that for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm better than fine, actually." He said the last sentence with the precision that told her it was the most carefully chosen statement he had made all day. "I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Good night, Sienna." "Good night, Dad." She put the phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the dark Texas night, at the land that was still there, still theirs, inexplicably, because a man who had every reason to let it go had instead walked into a bank and written a check. She thought, "There is more here than I understand." And she thought, "Tomorrow I'm going to understand it." The rain came on a Wednesday. It started at 4 in the morning, a low, persistent sound on the roof that Dale Merritt heard from his bed and lay listening to for several minutes before rising, pulling on his jeans and boots without turning on a light, and going out onto the front porch. The rain was steady and serious. Not a tease, not the brief, half-hearted precipitation that drought country farmers learned to distrust, but a real fall, the kind with weight and intention. He stood on the porch in the dark and felt the moisture in the air pressing against his face and hands. Smelled the particular electric mineral smell of rain hitting cracked West Texas earth for the first time in weeks. He stood there for a long time. Bobby came out behind him around 5, coffee in hand, and they stood together watching the sky lighten through the rain. "Radar shows it going through mid-afternoon," Bobby said. "How much?" 2.5, maybe 3 inches total. Dale let out a long breath. 3 inches on ground this dry would mostly run before the soil could absorb it, but some would go in. The water table would recover slightly. The grass would begin its slow climb back. The creek bed between Merritt and Ashby's land would run for the first time since June. "I called a hydrologist last week," Dale said, "about the water sharing proposal. If we modify the original design to include a shared retention pond on the creek line, both operations benefit and the cost share makes it viable even in a drought cycle. Bobby was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about this for a while. A while, Dale agreed. Even before you paid the debt. Dale looked out at the rain. The eastern sky was beginning to show the first gray-blue of pre-dawn behind the clouds, and the shapes of his fields were slowly emerging from the dark. The land he knew as intimately as any language. Every slope and low point and fence post. I've been thinking about a lot of things for a while, he said. Bobby nodded. He understood, as he often understood with Dale, that this was the complete version of the answer he was going to receive, and that it contained more than its surface suggested. 3 miles west, Conrad Ashby was also awake. He had been awake since the rain started. He was a light sleeper, always had been. And the sound of rain on this particular roof had never once failed to bring him fully conscious. He lay in bed for a few minutes listening, then got up the same way Dale had, jeans, boots, no lights. He went to the back porch and stood in the dark watching the rainfall on the Ashby fields. His father had built this house in 1967. Gerald Ashby had poured the foundation himself, framed it with his brother and 2 cousins. Built the back porch specifically so you could sit in the weather without being in it, so you could watch the rain or the lightning or the morning come without anything between you and it except the overhang. Conrad had stood on this porch through every significant moment of his adult life. The night he decided to come home from the Panhandle. The morning Margaret told him she was pregnant with Sienna. The evening after Margaret's funeral, when the house was finally empty of visitors and it was just him and the dark. He had never stood here feeling quite what he was feeling tonight. It was not happiness exactly. It was something more complex and less easily named. A kind of settling, the way the ground itself settled when water finally came after a long dry. Something that had been held rigid under pressure for a long time, releasing slightly, not breaking, but opening. He had spent the previous day in his study, the door closed, going through boxes he had not opened in years. He had found the book, the old Norton Anthology of American Poetry, that Margaret had kept on her shelf. The one with the broken spine and the annotation in her handwriting in several margins. He had opened it carefully, the way you handle something that has been significant for a long time and must be handled with appropriate seriousness. He found the folded draft on the 3rd page he checked, which told him that part of him had always known exactly where it was. He unfolded it. It was 9 lines in Margaret's handwriting, neat, slightly leftward, leaning. The particular cursive she had used for personal writing, rather than the print she used for lists in practical documents. It was not a letter to anyone. It was more like a journal entry in the structure of a letter, working something out, talking to no one in particular. She wrote about leaving something behind, about the particular feeling of a door closing not through conflict but through natural completion. The way a season ends, not with a bang, but with a gradual acknowledgement that it is over and something else has begun. There was no name anywhere in it. But Conrad knew, reading it, that it had been written around the time she met him. That whatever she was processing in those 9 lines, she had processed it and moved forward. She had chosen him. Not by default, not as a consolation, not because of anything other than the fact that when Conrad Ashby came back to Calvary in May of 1990, something had begun between them that was real and chosen and complete. He had known this in the rational part of himself for 30 years. The irrational part had needed to be told differently, and Dale Merritt, on a Thursday morning, had told it. He folded the draft back the way he had found it, placed it back in the book, and put the book on the shelf. Then he had called his attorney and instructed her to file the dismissal of the boundary dispute. Sienna came down at 6 to find her father on the back porch in the rainlight, coffee in hand, watching the water come down. She poured her own coffee and joined him. For several minutes they stood side by side, watching the field. The rain had slowed slightly but was still steady, and in the low spot at the south end of the east field they could already see standing water beginning to collect. The soil too compacted by drought to accept it quickly, taking what it could and letting the rest find its own way. "Tell me now," Sienna said. Conrad looked at her, and then slowly, with the particular difficulty of a man for whom direct personal narrative did not come easily, he told her, not everything, but enough. About Dale and her mother, about what Dale had said on his back porch, about the boundary disputes and what they had really been, about the dinner. Sienna listened without interrupting, which was not always easy for her, but she understood that this was a narrative that required space to move at its own pace. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't Mom ever say anything to you about him?" she said. "Because it was finished," Conrad said. "Before I came back, it was finished." There was nothing to say. Sienna nodded slowly. "And Dale paid your debt because he's been carrying something for 30 years that wasn't as large as he thought it was, but felt larger than it was, and he found a way to put it down." Conrad turned his coffee mug in his hands. "That's my interpretation. You'd have to ask him for his." Sienna looked out at the rain. "I want to go thank him," she said. Conrad was quiet. "He spent nearly $250,000, she said. "I don't care about the history or the debt he thought he owed. I'm his neighbor's daughter, and I need to look that man in the eye and say thank you." Conrad said nothing for a moment. Then, "That would be appropriate. Will you come with me?" He looked at her, then he looked back at the rain. "Not today," he said, "but soon." Sienna drove to Merritt Ranch that afternoon, between the morning rain and the second band that was showing on the radar for late evening. She pulled up to find Dale loading fence posts from a trailer into the bed of his truck. Practical work. The work that accumulates even during crises and continues on the other side of it. He looked up when she pulled in. She got out of her car. She was wearing work clothes, not dressed up, not performing anything. She walked toward him with her hands at her sides. "Mr. Merritt," she said. "Miss Ashby," he said. He set down the fence post he was holding. "I came to thank you," she said. Directly and simply, "You saved our land. Whatever your reasons were, the outcome is that Ashby Farm is still in our family. I'm not going to pretend I fully understand why you did it, but I'm not going to let it go unremarked either. Thank you." Dale looked at her. He had watched this young woman grow up from the far side of a creek that had served as a practical and symbolic divide for her entire life. She had her mother's eyes. He had noticed that the few times he had encountered her over the years, and filed the observation away without examining it. "You're welcome," he said, simply, without deflection. She nodded. Then, "My father dropped the boundary filing. I know, I heard from the county office. He's interested in revisiting the water sharing proposal. If you are..." "I am," Dale said. "Then I'll put together a revised analysis. We can meet when it's ready." She paused. "Professionally, I do agricultural business consulting." "I know," Dale said. "I've seen your work. You did the restructuring proposal for the Morrison operation in 2023. She looked at him. "You followed that?" "I follow anything related to regional operations management," he said. "It was good work." Something shifted slightly in Sienna's expression, surprise, and then something that rearranged itself into a more professional equanimity. "Thank you." She held out her hand. He shook it, a firm, direct handshake. "I'll have the water proposal ready within 2 weeks," she said. "I'll look forward to it." She got back in her car and drove down the Merritt Ranch driveway, watching in her rearview mirror as Dale went back to loading fence posts with the focused, methodical energy of a man who has been doing the same kind of work for 40 years and expects to do it for 20 more. She drove home with the rain beginning again on her windshield and the distinct feeling that something had shifted in the fundamental arrangement of things, not dramatically, not completely, but in the way that shifts in established structures sometimes happen slowly, through the quiet accommodation of long-standing forces finally moving in a different direction. The second band of rain came through that evening and dropped another inch and a half over Harlan County, and by the time it cleared around 9 o'clock, the creek bed between Merritt and Ashbyland was running. It was a modest flow, not the strong current it carried in a good spring, but real water moving over real ground, finding the channels it had carved over decades and following them south toward the county drainage. Dale stood at his side of the creek in the dark with a flashlight and listened to it. The sound of moving water in a place that had been silent for 11 weeks was almost disorienting in its completeness, the way the return of something fundamental recalibrates your sense of what was missing. He stood there for a while. Then he went inside. Bobby Stills found him the next morning at the kitchen table with a legal pad, working through numbers. "Water proposal," Bobby said, pouring coffee. "Preliminary cost estimates," Dale said. "Sienna Ashby's gonna put together a proper analysis, but I want to have a working framework before she does." Bobby sat down across from him, looked at the figures. "This is the retention pond concept you mentioned. Modified version. Shared infrastructure, proportional cost share based on acreage served, maintenance responsibility rotating on a 3-year cycle." Dale tapped the pad with his pen. "It's a good deal for both operations. Should have been done 10 years ago." 8 years ago, Bobby said. "That's when the proposal was originally on the table." Dale looked up at him. "I counted," Bobby said. Dale held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the legal pad. "Should have been done 8 years ago," he agreed. Bobby drank his coffee. Outside, the morning was different. There was actual moisture in the air, the particular sweetness that West Texas carried for the brief window after significant rain before the sun and wind stripped it away. The grass along the fence line was already showing the faint green that drought-hardened pasture shows within hours of receiving water, a color almost too subtle to be called green, more of a remembering. "Dale," Bobby said. Dale looked up. "You did a good thing." It was said plainly, without emphasis or decoration, in the same register that Bobby Stills used for everything: practical assessments, weather observations, equipment evaluations. Dale looked at him for a moment. "I did what was in front of me," he said. "That's usually what a good thing is," Bobby said. 3 weeks later, on a Friday morning in early October, Dale Merritt and Conrad Ashby stood together at the creek line between their properties. It was the first time in 31 years that they had stood at this boundary in any configuration other than confrontation. Sienna was with them, along with a civil engineer named Paul Rigway she had brought in from Lubbock to assess the retention pond site. Paul was walking the creek bank 30 yards south of them, taking measurements and making notes on a tablet, occasionally calling back observations that Sienna transcribed into her own notebook. Dale and Conrad stood slightly apart from the working activity, watching the creek. The water level had dropped back significantly since the rain, but it was still a trickle, enough to constitute a running creek rather than a dry bed, which was already better than it had been. "My grandfather called this Sable Creek," Conrad said, "on account of the dark mineral color the water ran when it came off the mesa." Dale looked at him. "My grandfather called it the same thing." Conrad glanced at him. "Did he? I found it in an old deed description once." "Eastern boundary follows Sable Creek to the Cedar Post marking." Dale paused. "Same document probably described your western boundary." "The same creek," Conrad said. "The same creek," Dale agreed. They were quiet for a moment, watching Paul Ridgway work downstream. "She's good," Dale said, with a slight inclination of his head toward Sienna. "She is," Conrad said. Something in the way he said it, the simplicity of the pride, was different from most things Dale had heard Conrad Ashby say in 30 years of antagonistic proximity. "You should be proud of her," Dale said. Conrad looked at him briefly. "I am," he said. Sienna looked up from her notebook at that moment, caught her father's eye, and something passed between them in the quick currency of a look. The compact communication of people who know each other well. She went back to her notes. Paul Ridgway came back up the bank with his measurements. "Good news," he said. "The site here is better than I expected. You've got natural topography working in your favor on both sides. The pond could be built to hold significantly more capacity than the original proposal spec'd, which would give you meaningful drought year buffer." "What's the cost differential?" Sienna asked. "I'll have the full numbers in the report, but preliminary, maybe 15% above the original budget. With the cost share structure you've outlined, that's about 8,000 additional per party." Dale and Conrad looked at each other. "Fine," Dale said. Conrad nodded. "Fine." Paul Ridgway looked between them with the mild curiosity of a professional who had walked into someone else's long history and was only seeing the current chapter. "All right, I'll have the full report to Miss Ashby by end of next week." He went back to his work. Sienna caught Dale's eye across the creek bank. She gave a small, direct nod, professional acknowledgement between two people who have agreed on something practical and important. Dale returned it. In November, the construction began. It took 3 weeks to complete the retention pond and the associated inlet and outlet infrastructure. Paul Ridgway supervised. Bobby Stills coordinated the Merritt side of the labor. Sienna managed the Ashby side. Conrad and Dale appeared on site daily, did not collaborate on operational decisions. That was left to Bobby and Sienna, but observed the work with the parallel attention of two men who have been invested in the same ground from different directions their entire adult lives. On the last day of construction, when the final grading was done and the inlet gates were set, Sienna and Bobby tested the system together, opening the creek diversion and watching the water begin to fill the shared basin for the first time. The sound it made, filling the clay-lined basin on the Harlan County Creek line, was unremarkable in itself, water moving into a constructed space as water does. But both of them stood and watched it for longer than strictly necessary. When it was full enough to represent, Bobby looked at Sienna. "Good work," he said. "Good work," she said back. Dale Merritt sat on his front porch on the last evening of November and looked at the sky, which had gone the particular dark blue that comes before full dark in the clear Texas autumn. 41 years ago, his father had handed him the deed to this land with a handshake and 2 words. He had not let it go. Through everything, the economic crashes, the flood, the drought, the 30 years of friction with the man across the creek that had cost both of them more than either one had ever calculated, he had not let it go. He was 61 years old. The land would need to go somewhere, eventually. He had no children. Bobby had children, but they had no interest in ranch work, which was something Bobby had reconciled himself to years ago with more grace than Dale thought he himself could have managed. The question of the land's future was not urgent. He had time, but he was aware, more than he had been in previous years, of the shape of time, of the way it moved differently in the second half of a life, the way the past became more present rather than less, surfacing with a relevance it hadn't seemed to have when it was still close enough to be immediate. He thought about Margaret. He thought about her in the way he had learned to think about her over 36 years, not with the acute sharpness of early loss, but with the specific tenderness that comes with time, the understanding that a person can have been central to your life without having been your person, that love does not require reciprocal permanence to have been real. She had told him who he was when he didn't know yet. That was no small thing. He thought about Conrad, about the dinner, about 2 men eating brisket in the amber light of a September evening, talking about water rights and weather patterns, and carefully, obliquely, about the 30 years they had wasted on a feud that had been a proxy for grief. He thought about Sienna, about her directness, her competence, the way she had walked across his gravel drive and thanked him without elaboration or sentimentality, and the way she had said, "I'll have the water proposal ready within 2 weeks," as though it were simply the next practical step, because for her it was, because she was the kind of person who converted feeling into action with the clean efficiency of someone who has been trained to do so and has the character to sustain it. He thought about the creek running again. Sable Creek, the same creek. In December, Sienna came to Merritt Ranch for the first operational review of the water sharing agreement. She arrived at 8 in the morning, punctual, professional, carrying a leather portfolio with the first season's data. Bobby was there. Dale was at the head of the table. They went through the numbers for 90 minutes, identified 2 calibration adjustments needed in the inlet gate mechanism, and outlined the monitoring protocol for the following year. When the meeting concluded, Bobby excused himself to take a call, and Sienna was packing her portfolio when she looked up and found Dale looking at her with an expression she didn't immediately categorize. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead. Did you know it would turn out this way? When you paid the debt, did you think about what might come after, or was it only about what had come before?" Dale was quiet for a moment. "Both," he said finally. "I knew what had come before. The after, I didn't know the details. But I knew the land would still be there. And people who work the same land long enough eventually figure out how to work together." He paused. "That's how it goes, out here." Sienna looked at him. "My mother would have liked knowing this happened," she said. It was a statement, not a question. She had thought about it carefully before saying it, and it was simply what she believed to be true. Dale held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "I think she would have." Sienna nodded once. She picked up her portfolio. "Same time in March for the quarterly review," she said. "Same time in March," Dale confirmed. She drove home under a wide December sky with the Harlan County fields on both sides of the county road showing the first real green. Of the recovery, thin and fragile still, but real, the kind of green that knows it is going to keep going. On the last night of the year, Dale Merritt stood at the creek line alone. The water was running, not strong, but steady, the way Sable Creek ran in a normal winter, persistent and unspectacular, doing what creeks do, which is simply to keep moving, regardless of the conditions on either bank. He looked east across the water toward the Ashby land. The lights were on in the farmhouse. He could see them from here, the warm yellow squares of lit windows in the dark, the shape of a house inhabited by people who were going about the ordinary business of a winter evening. He stood there for a while, his hands in his jacket pockets, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. Then he turned and walked back across his own land, through the dark and the cold and the particular smell of winter grass in West Texas, toward his own lights. Behind him, Sable Creek kept running. It had been running a long time. It would run a long time more.